People like to say, have a good day, and it's a nice sentiment, but it's a fixed perspective that can put a lot of pressure on us. It's also really hard to define from person to person. What about instead if we ask ourselves, how can I have a better day? At work, at home, in life? That's what this show is all about. The Have a Better Day podcast comes to you from Boone, a personalized coaching platform that helps businesses everywhere to support the whole humans, which are their employees. We have our pulse on what employees are dealing with in today's workplace, and we want to share those insights with you. Welcome to the Have a Better Day podcast.
So we have seen countless employees today in today's workplace find themselves in this constant cycle of stress and chaos. I know I feel it every single day where I'm almost addicted to this adrenaline rush of feeling busy, feeling like I'm running around. And, while a certain level of stress can be a good thing, after a while, it can really take its toll and ultimately lead to burnout, chronic stress, decreased productivity, and ultimately, we're talking about Mental Health Awareness Month, poor mental health. So I'm really excited today to be joined by Dr. Kimberly Byrd, who is one of our amazing Boone coaches who has been a therapist for over 30 years and has a deep background in personal and professional coaching as well. And she's seen, Kim, you've seen a ton of background in and around this conversation of stress and chaos in the workplace. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective on how this challenge is presenting itself in today's workplace, and then really kind of walking away with some tangible solutions that we all can take back into our day-to-day that's ultimately going to better us all. So Kim, so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Kim, can you tell us, maybe just by starting with a journey of how you became a personal and professional coach, and more specifically, how you've started to see this stress and chaos addiction arise in today's workplace?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's interesting how I've been a therapist for over 30 years, and it's been so rewarding to take some of those techniques and sort of turn them into very useful in the coaching world. We have clients that work way more than 40 hours a week, have families, have a social life. Burnout levels are high. People are stressed. So it's been very interesting to work with those folks, have them open up about what is stressing them out, maybe more professionally, maybe a little bit in the personal area, and be able to help them through that.
And Kim, just for the audience that's out there, you mentioned you're a therapist, or you've been a therapist for 30 years. Maybe just some insight into how do you think about coaching versus therapy? There's obviously some overlap there. How do you think about those two things?
In a therapeutic setting, I find that we spend some time looking backwards, figuring out how did we develop our patterns, what sort of influences in our lives growing up might have steered us in one direction, coping psychologically, some physical patterns we've developed. So we look at that history. We look at those important people and important experiences that may have shaped us. With coaching, we don't necessarily look as far back as that. We might dive into a little bit about work ethic, or how maybe whoever raised you looked at work and looked at balancing everything. But for the most part with coaching, we try to stay in the here and now. This is the problem I'm having. This is the challenge I'm facing. What can I do? How can I feel better?
Yeah. And that's, I think, something that we've definitely found at Boone is and especially you think about how do you make the idea of talking about what's going on in your life more approachable to the masses? There's a lot of people out there that, I know me, I had this stigma for a while where I didn't necessarily want to know all of those childhood behaviors and beliefs. There's an intimidating element to that. But if you can frame it through the lens of hey, I want to just better understand, here's the challenge that I'm dealing with today. How do I help get from point A to point B? And so thinking about today's challenge, where we're talking about this stress and chaos addiction that I feel like so many of us have. I know I have it on a day-to-day basis. I feel like if I'm not running around with a chicken with his head cut off, I'm not doing enough and I should be doing more. So maybe just tell me a little bit more about your own experience and like, I guess, how did this stress and chaos addiction problem most prevalently arise in your own life? And like, was there an experience where this kind of, you had an aha moment of sorts?
For sure. I a little bit about my background is I spent 15 years working with hospice, and what that means is most of my patients passed away in their homes by choice. So my office was my car. I would drive from patient to patient to patient, sometimes a stable patient, sometimes an extreme emergency, but I did that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 15 years. And, you're always on call. Death isn't something that can happen between the hours of 8 and 5. So sometimes I was, maybe at one of my kids' Valentine's Day parties in elementary school, and I would get, way back when we had pagers. I'm really dating myself there, but, we would get the message.
Well, quick story on
Yeah.
that. My wife is a doctor, and you're on call. They're still using pagers.
Are they?
So not yeah, they're still using pagers. It blows my mind. I'm like, you could just use a cell phone for that. But anyways.
Right. Yes. Oh, well, that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not as old as I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that was my life. That's all I knew was the emergent speeding from one home to another, doing my documentation in a parking lot if I had a few minutes, never really eating. A funny story, one of my friends and I that were both working at the same time for hospice is sometimes we would find like a piece of granola bar or an almond on the floor of our car, and we would be so thankful that we could have lunch that day. So that was my normal routine. And I thought that was normal. I thought that everybody felt that way. So when I left hospice and I went into higher education, I was at a desk. I could bring lunch. I could bring snacks. I could bring drinks. I could use the restroom whenever I wanted to. It was right down the hall. And I didn't have to stop at a McDonald's. I realized at that point, I think how the addiction to stress and chaos is part of our everyday until we know, wow, like that probably wasn't healthy. The issue was, though, I had to spend, and I'll be honest and probably talk about this a lot today, is it's really hard to break patterns. So it took me about 3 years to learn how to, for example, like sit, even to watch a movie. Like prior to that, I could not sit that long. I don't have ADD. I don't have ADHD. I don't have any of those challenges. My challenge was, if to your point that you said earlier, if I wasn't going at 100 miles an hour, I didn't know how to be.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I learned it.
Yeah. And I feel like, that totally resonates with me. There are certain things that I am able to find joy in from a hobby perspective. Like I love to golf. I do, I'll watch the occasional TV, and I feel like I have found ways to be able to relax and be present with family and things like that. But if I don't feel like I'm super busy at work, that actually just causes more anxiety around all other phases. So it's like, maybe just shed a little bit more light on your perspective on this challenge that we're all facing, and like, where is that anxiety coming from that I'm feeling, and how does that habit form that you're talking about is so hard to break?
I think, we don't realize when we're in it. And I think that's the hardest part. Our bodies become addicted, and everyone knows this. Everyone has habits. Everyone has patterns. We're addicted to not only drinking the coffee in the morning, but the process of making our coffee. We're addicted to driving through Starbucks on our way to work, if that's your addiction. Everyone has addictions. Working out, reading, playing music. These are all, people don't want to use the word addiction because they think that only means drugs and alcohol, right? But addiction is real. The 3 hormones that are released when we're stressed in that fight or flight situation, we become addicted to. Most of the time, we don't even realize we are. So when those hormones like cortisol and sort of like that adrenaline feeling that we get when we're stressed, it becomes our norm. So we don't really respond when those brain chemicals are not in our body. So we sometimes subconsciously seek out stress or seek out extra busies because we're used to feeling those yucky chemicals release.
Interesting. And in terms of like tangible things in the workplace, I guess what sort of things are you seeing that are the biggest factors contributing to that addiction? Like, is it just this remote work environment where we can't turn it off? Is it excessive workload? Like what is it that is most contributing to this in the modern day employee?
I hear a lot of our clients talk about how, well, a few different things. I think the main one is, let's say they're getting messages, either, emails, texts, maybe through Microsoft Word or however their little messaging is, Slack.
Yeah.
And when they get those, the person sending them is also operating in stress land. So when they write them, it's almost like a little bit of a flavor of panic. Then I look at that and then I feel their panic. So I absorb now their panic, their emergent kind of emotion. So now we've got two of us that are completely going off the rails. And is it really an emergency? Should we really be this worked up over it? I think that's a big component of it. And also, to your point, the fact of turning it off, right? There are a million people that have like their notifications turned on so that they're constantly seeing when they're getting a message from work, and they have that notification turned on 24/7. So they've never really click out of their work persona when they're at home.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen this issue with boundaries, but particularly with the remote and hybrid work setting, where it's like, hey, you have this additional flexibility associated with your work, but now it's really hard to distinguish like what is work life and what is personal life. When can you turn it off? I personally deal with that. I've had issues setting boundaries in a lot of different ways, but in certain ways, I'm also, as the CEO of a company, you kind of have to be the last line of defense. So it's a different sort of story, I think. As you take a step back, we have HR leaders listening to this episode. So as you think like holistically about a business, you just gave a really good analogy of like, well, there was one of us and then there was two of us who are now stressed out. As you think holistically about the company, what does that mean for the overall well-being and engagement, productivity, culture, all of those sorts of things across an organization when this problem becomes so prevalent?
If you've got a bunch of us reacting in a stress sort of manner, emergent feeling, our yucky hormones are all over the place, and you've got a lot of people feeling that way. There are a lot of common sort of acting out things that people do, right? So maybe they're quicker to anger or irritation. They become frustrated with their coworkers when in the past they never would have done that. They might be late to work or to meetings because they have so many things going on. It's very hard for them to sort of, okay, at 2:00, I have to log in here, but hang on, I just have to do one more thing. And they're constantly in that mode. Yeah. So if you see someone that kind of looks a little edgy, the timing of how they operate changes, maybe even their voice or their response to you is maybe a little extra short or bitey. You're going to see those things start rising. And the more folks that are feeling those stressors, the more reaction. So then, of course, it becomes stressed people versus stressed people, which can make for a really uncomfortable environment.
Yeah. And I think what we've heard is that ultimately starts to lead to higher rates of turnover. The number one reason why an employee leaves an organization is because of their direct manager. So if you're starting to feel that toxic relationship every day, that's going to lead you to leaving your organization. I think hopefully one of the things and one of the most common use cases that I hear with Boone is like, how can you reframe your relationship with your manager? How can you reframe your relationship to think about these sorts of challenges? Maybe just putting it in another perspective and hearing what that manager is going through from your boon coach and how you might be able to deal with that a little bit differently. So it's all super interesting. And I guess, Kim, maybe just for the audience, like obviously talking about how this is showing up in your coaching sessions specifically, is there like a specific use case that comes to mind in terms of here was a specific challenge in and around this area that I thought was really unique for, might resonate most with the modern day employee?
I kind of have two sort of common threads that run through a lot of different employees from various types of companies. So we can't just say it's one specific job title or job level. Yeah. But a big one is, and I guess I can say that since 2020, we've seen an increase in this, but is that striving for perfection. Now, we challenge our clients to define for me, well, what is perfection? What in a day at work for you would be considered you would leave or shut your laptop and say, I was perfect today? If you really think about that question, you're never going to be perfect. In your own eyes, no one else's eyes, everyone else thinks you did a great job. But if I never feel like I'm reaching whatever those perfect goals I have set for myself that day, I will always feel low and negative about myself. And that's a horrible, very not based in facts feeling. So I'm already stressed. Now I think I didn't do a great job. I don't know what to do with myself at that point, right? I come home, I'm kind of low, I'm lumpy. I should go for a walk. It's a beautiful day. I should go to the gym. I should read a book. I don't have any energy to do that. So that becomes the cycle. And that's very hard for our clients because they feel this, they're doing a good job. Their supervisors give them credit for everything that they've done, and they are very positive interactions in their meetings. But because they're operating in that constant fight or flight, they've decided that I'm not good enough. So I'm going to if I work an extra 6 hours today, maybe I will feel like I'm good enough. And so we really dive into that perfectionism, kind of comes into that imposter syndrome a little bit. We're all given tasks we've never done before. Am I going to be good enough? If someone asks me to do this, do they really think that I'm capable? Those kinds of things are really from all levels of employers are experiencing these things.
Yeah. And I feel like that happens. That story is unique at every level, but it's happening to a certain extent where, like, if you are an individual contributor, there's a certain level of like wanting to be perfect to whatever deliverable you're having to your manager. And if you're a manager, there's a whole host of other challenges that you're dealing with, but similar sorts of feelings of inadequacy around that. And then, I guess running Boone, I mean, I feel like you're like talking directly to the feelings that I'm having every single day, where it's like, if we are not absolutely perfect as a brand, as a company, every single thing that we put out there, like, I feel like this is my baby, but it's also like, there's so many different, fears of failure, fears of inadequacy that come associated with this. So it's just, how do you get out of those habits?
Yeah.
Maybe you can enlighten all of us.
Yeah.
What's the silver bullet in all of this for those who are dealing with the struggles you're talking about?
It's funny because a client of mine and I were just talking last night about this, and we got a blank, looked like a pie, like an apple pie, and it was blank, and it had all the pieces, the triangles, and we were listing in each of the pieces of the pie what he felt his roles were. And I'm talking from personal to professional to being a friend, a son, everything, a dad. And then we filled up the pie with his roles, and then he put sort of these emotional reactions next to some of those roles, mainly the work role. And then also response reactions. So response reactions are the ones that we take a minute, we pause, we think about what we're doing, what we're saying, how this impacts us, and then we answer the person or we complete the task. The reaction response is the one that's made out of fight or flight. And it's like, just like react, react, react. And it keeps us in that stress zone. So it was kind of funny because on the sides of the pies, we're writing down reactions versus responses. And at the end, we were looking at it and he's like, wow, okay, well, these pieces of pie I need to work on. And so, we put some things in place. And I think if I looked at the professional piece of pie that we were working on, some of the things that we're lacking is we forget, if some of us were in person going to work every day, Monday through Friday before 2020, think about, we went and walked and got coffee. We met up in the mail room and we chit-chatted. We went to meetings and maybe we spent the first 15 minutes of a meeting just talking about what we did in the weekend. None of us do that anymore. None of us.
Yeah.
So putting some breaks in just to kind of rejuvenate yourself is sometimes the simplest thing that we can do.
And I do feel like there's a big piece of this, and I mentioned it earlier, but how much of this is like employees having the insight to be empathetic in the moment to what somebody else is going through or what they're hearing from somebody else. And, I think that element of like you going into panic because this other person is in panic, how can we, or do you feel like that's a big part of this, is like, how can we reframe our own reaction to this feedback by just having a better understanding of like where their sense of panic is coming from and really having that insight? Like, is that play a role in any of this?
Yeah, definitely. And I love the wording you chose, the reframe, because that's probably most of our day should be spent reframing either how we are intaking information or how we're, spitting it back out. We spend a lot of time with that reaction that the reframing doesn't come into play until, we're laying in bed at 11 p.m., not sleeping. Because then, of course, that's when we're replaying everything. So now we're a tired person, we're a stressed person, we're replaying everything. Our brain never gets to a point of calm. I try my hardest, even though it's a big challenge because it's different reaction than any other thing you've ever done, is when I get something that seems very emergent, an email that seems like this person is coming in hot, I do stop for a minute. I read it and I think to myself, okay, like I ask questions to myself. Who is this person getting their direction from? Why is this person seem so abrupt and anxious? Why have they emailed me 3 times in 5 minutes? I try to ask questions first before I respond to the person because I want to try to understand what's going on, what predicted this for this person. A lot of times we have the same people emailing us the same ways, so we can have sort of a prediction. But when it's an oddity and someone's coming in with a lot of anxiety, I want to ask myself first a few questions before I ask them. Don't be as scared to ask the person, like, this seems very urgent and you seem stressed. Can you tell me a little bit more about that or how I can help you?
Yeah.
Sometimes people just want to be validated.
I think that element, think about how much more challenging it can be to have that conversation operating in a remote environment where you talk about like not having the water cooler talk, but how about not being able to like have somewhat of that close connection where you feel comfortable saying something like that. Imagine these, you're a new employee to an organization. You've actually never worked in any sort of in-person setting. You've never even met anybody in your company. Right. And now you're all of a sudden asking them like, hey, you seem really stressed. You seem really stressed. So it's like, that's a real challenge that we're seeing. And I mean, we operate remotely and that's challenging in its own way, but that's the real big thing is like, you don't have that water cooler talk how do you find the time to build that sort of social emotional connection to be able to have those kinds of conversations, which are so crucial?
And maybe asking if you've got this disconnect from sort of the personal or social side of with your coworkers, there's nothing wrong with clarifying, right? Like, I received your message. What is the due date on this? Or when would you like this deliverable? Or when do you need an answer from me? A lot of times, if you ask that question, the person usually will take a minute, and sometimes you're doing them a favor because they take a second to calm. And then they may say, oh, tomorrow at noon. Even hearing themselves say that is a calming thing for them. They're not going to just be 5 minutes ago. We're seeing if you ask someone that, every part of the conversation calms itself. So a lot of our clients are trying to ask more questions, whether it be on the social personal side or the deadline side.
I love that. Okay, so ask more questions. And I think you've given some great nuggets in here. I always like to end these episodes by just kind of summarizing. If you were to take 3 simple takeaways, if I'm an employee or if I'm a manager listening to this and I'm trying to bring something back into my workplace, what are 3 takeaways on how to break this stress and chaos routine that I've built to get where I am in my career while still maintaining, having faith in the fact that I'm still going to perform as an employee?
Taking care of yourself does not mean that you stink at your job, right? Or that you didn't do a good job, or that you won't get that promotion or that raise. A lot of us put those things together, and I think we've talked ourselves into believing that for so long, which is why nobody is taking care of themselves, because they're worried about being laid off, or they really want that promotion, or, they just had a new baby and they're really hoping for a raise because kids are expensive, or there's always this reason. And so I think the biggest thing, if you can even write it on a sticky note or put it on on your phone, taking care of myself does not mean I'm a bad employee. Right. So some of the ways around that, because we've got to start tiny. We can't just all of a sudden put all of these things in play and expect us, patterned, routine people, to just click over and do a new routine that's healthy. So we start tiny. I have 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon built into my calendar. On my side, it says busy, or on their side. On my side, it says self-care. What that means is nobody can book with me at that time. No, I can't talk on the phone at that time. And most importantly, I cannot sit here during those 10 minutes, because then what I'll do is start getting into my paperwork or doing little doodads that I have. So the rule is I have to leave this desk and this room for 10 minutes. Depending on my mood and depending on how stressed my client would be, is we decide, what do we want to do? Do we want to go down and get something to eat? Do we want to go get the mail so we feel a weather change, a temperature change? Again, a physical, tangible change. I'm no longer sitting here. I'm doing something else. Those are tiny. And people will say to me, I can't leave my desk, or I can't not do something for 10 minutes. And I always challenge them. I said, you have to go to the refrigerator and get some water. That takes maybe 6 minutes. So maybe 6 minutes is your break. So that purposeful self-care moment actually de-escalates our chemicals. The ones we talked about earlier will de-escalate those. And that's a big one for people. I was going to talk about just also, I think that we do a poor job at acknowledging how we're feeling. We might feel those upset bellies or headaches or tension in our jaws and just keep pushing through. That's where burnout comes in, right? We've got to address those. Our body is screaming at us, telling us, you're not doing things right. Please help me. And a lot of us ignore that. And then we move into burnout, and then we're worse off. We've got to listen to our bodies. That's so important and so missed right now.
Yeah, I think that's the root of all of it, is listening to our bodies, and actually, not waiting until you're at the point of crisis, and actually building these things into your day-to-day life. And so these things are great at an individual level. And I guess just for the HR leaders out there who are thinking like, how can I make an impact on my organization as a whole by implementing certain things into my day-to-day for my company? What are some things that you've seen work well that are, I mean, maybe there is some sort of calendaring across the organization or things like that, but for HR leaders out there, what advice do you have?
Well, we've had a lot of HR leaders set up, no meeting Wednesdays or, half day, laptop half day only on Fridays. The rest of it, we will let you know if there's an emergency. We'll text you. Those are wonderful, but everyone has to be on board. And what we're finding is we have a lot of companies that Boone works with that have no meeting Wednesdays. And what we find is people are like, oh, I'm free on Wednesday. Why don't we meet then? Instead of saying, oh yeah, I'm not allowed to meet with you on Wednesday. Let's do Tuesday. I'm still doing my job. We're still creating the project. We're going to get it done. But remember, we're not allowed to do Wednesday. So the no meeting Wednesday, for example, is something HR is trying to do across the board. And if it's held firm, it's really helping folks. They also have had a lot of lunch and learns that, and people are going to hate this word, but that are almost mandatory, strongly encouraged, I'll say, because what it does is it gives everybody an hour, maybe 40 minutes to sit and only look at the screen or only sit with their fellow coworkers and have a sandwich together, but they're also getting a little bit of training in there. They can sneak it in there. These sort of things are just changing up the everyday, which can have huge benefits, and they don't have to be very, very big gestures. A couple of my clients have rules, and they work in HR, and they have rules that they're only allowed to do. They have an email open, and they take notes in it, and they are only allowed to email a person once a day. So we all have those folks who just fire off an email, fire off an email and send it. Instead of sort of collecting their thoughts, maybe sending an email, maybe only at noon or at 5, whatever, that's going to reduce everyone's anxiety.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of companies implement some of the, whether it be no meeting Wednesdays or half day Fridays or mental health days. The real challenge is like, can you when you say get everybody on board, it's primarily like this all starts at the top. So like you need C-suite buy-in, you need the CEOs and everybody to be truly bought into the strategy if you're going to have a real impact on the culture. But yeah, these are all amazing takeaways. And I guess lastly, Kim, you've been amazing. If somebody wants to find you after this, how do we find you?
Oh my gosh, it would be wonderful to link with anyone who's listening today. And I just encourage you to reach out to Boone, and they will link us up, and then we can see each other on Zoom whenever we want. So that would be the best route.
Yeah, well, that would be amazing. And just so everybody knows, Kim does one-on-one coaching for Boone, and then the term that I do not like so much, but the lunch and learn term, whether it be a coffee and learn or whatever it is, Kim does awesome company-wide, whatever you want to call it, whether it be around the stress and chaos addict or stress and burnout in the workplace, how to find better work-life balance or integration, whatever it may be. Happy to talk further about that. But yeah, Kim, thank you so much for your time. You are great as always.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Everyone better take care of themselves out there.
Yes, exactly. Mental Health Awareness Month.
That's right.